And joining us now, Peter Milliken, the longest-serving Speaker in the history of the House of Commons in this country and the former Liberal MP for Kingston and the Islands. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Steve.
Are you very well because you didn't have to campaign this past time?
That helped, I'm sure.
Improved your mood. Well, I want to do a bit of a tour d'horizon, as they say, because you have had that job in that chair, which is probably a lot more comfortable than the chair you're in right now. And, you know, I read this neat little thing about you a long time ago about how you subscribed to Hansard when you were a kid. So obviously from your kind of very early years, you had some love of Parliament that was percolating inside your veins. Do you know where that came from?
No, I'm not sure. My first visit was either grade 7 or grade 8. I don't remember which, but I remember going and watching question period sitting in the gallery with my class, and I thought it was fascinating then. So once I got into high school and had a chance to go and see it, I did, and my cousin John Matheson had been elected as the member for Leeds. He's my mother's first cousin, and that gave me a place to go when I was there to his office and chat with him and all that sort of thing, which I did.
He's still around, isn't he?
He is. He's
what
still
is he,
living.
90-something?
95 or 6,
95?
yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember how he lost that '68 election?
By 4 votes.
4 votes, I know.
I remember quite well, yes.
Yeah. In Trudeau-mania, how does he lose by 4 votes?
Well, exactly. It was a bit of a shock.
So have you figured out, though, I mean, you saw question period, you saw John Matheson, you had that connection to what was going on up there. Mm-hmm. Do you remember what it was in particular that you found so appealing?
Well, just the vigorous debate on issues that the parties engaged in the House, the members engaged in the House, and Hansard was very inexpensive, $2 or $3 a session. I've forgotten the price. And you could subscribe, and usually it came 2 days later. So, you know, on Wednesday you'd get Monday's Hansard. It was great. And so I'd thumb through them and read them, at least the question period, not usually all the debate.
How old would you have been at that time?
Heavens, 62, maybe 14.
Did anybody at any point say to you, Peter, this is an odd thing for a 14-year-old boy to be doing?
Not that I recall, but then I don't know how many people knew I was getting it.
Okay. No, most 14-year-old boys are subscribing to Playboy in the day, that's all. You were subscribing to Hansard. It's just an interesting choice, that's all.
I think my parents might have disapproved if I'd been subscribing to Playboy.
They may have. No, I'm sure Hansard was a lot safer, I'm sure. I got this letter here. You know about this letter? Of course you do. You wrote it. This is a letter that you wrote to the Kingston Whig Standard in 1964. I guess you were about 17 then. And you wrote, Michael Smith, our director, let's ask to bring this up, because they were having great debates about the flag, of course, in Parliament around this time. And you wrote, when Canadians are forced to give up a symbol that is not representative of the whole country for something that recognizes the equality of our two great cultures, rather than making crude remarks about the other race, then Canada shall indeed be worthy of her status as a nation, and Kingston can help in this endeavor. Why'd you write that letter? Well,
because I got so annoyed at reading the editorial that the editor had written about the evils of the flag. And I think at that point, as best I recall, it was the Pearson pennant, as they called it, that had been suggested as the new national flag of Canada.
There's the letter. We've got a photocopy of it. We're going to get a shot of it right here. And that's going back a long way. There's a letter to the editor, and here's your name here, and you're a 17-year-old kid writing letters to the editor about the flag. Something was in your DNA that was different from most kids. That's pretty apparent. Would you agree?
Well, I suppose.
Okay.
I suppose. It was, you know, I certainly had an interest in the debate. My cousin John was involved in this, or got involved soon after. And of course, the whole idea of getting a new flag I thought was quite exciting. It was an interesting issue to follow at the time. And I think when I wrote that, I would have been the head boy at my high school, so I was keen on expressing views on behalf of the students to some extent, although I, of course, wasn't doing that in this letter.
You were representing others already. I got another letter here. This is Ottawa, July 6th, 1964, and you're writing to Edgar Benson. And for those of us who've been around for a while, that name will sound familiar. He was, of course, a Liberal cabinet minister, also represented Kingston. And he writes you a letter congratulating you on your letter to, the editor says, your letter on the flag question to the Whig was a model. There you go.
Yeah, see, that was before I was head boy. Sorry, I got elected in the fall, I think, of '64. So.
Was he influential as well, Edgar Benson?
Oh, yes. He was a great guy. He was. I went to his nomination meeting in 1962, his first nomination meeting, with my parents, but I got them to go, and we went. And then he got elected, and I started meeting him and working in his elections from then on. So I had a good time doing it. Yeah.
We're painting a bit of a picture here which suggests that the logical outcome of all your involvement in politics is in fact the job you eventually got and held for longer than anybody else, which is Speaker. And of course the tradition is when you are chosen Speaker, they've got to drag you to the chair because it's the job nobody wanted, because in the old days they cut your head off if you brought bad news to the king.
Exactly.
But you wanted the job. Why'd you want the job?
Oh, because I thought it would be fun. I was interested in procedure. I'd been the Deputy Speaker and Assistant Deputy, if you can use that expression, before that, so I was quite comfortable looking at doing the job as Speaker. I ran in '93 without success. And then I didn't run in '97, but the suggestion was that I'd be made Deputy Speaker after, and that's exactly what happened. So.
And you got the job in 2001?
2001,
2001.
Yeah.
Stanley Knowles, whom of course you'll remember, the great parliamentarian for the NDP, said it was a job that a lot of people wanted to see him in because he knew so much about Parliament and its history and its procedures. But he didn't like the notion of giving up that partisan role that members of Parliament play. You obviously didn't mind giving that up. How come?
Well, I got used to it as Deputy Speaker. I adjusted to the change. It was a bit of a change. I certainly enjoyed taking part in debates before that, but once you're Speaker, you're kind of out of that.
So you never showed up to caucus?
Nope.
Never went to fundraisers?
Only in Kingston.
Local fundraisers?
Yes. Yeah.
But if a fellow
no
member...
party conventions. You
Nope.
might go to where the convention was. A couple of times I did that. When they had one in Vancouver, I went out there. I stayed in a hotel nearby, and you'd walk along the street, and in coffee shops there'd be colleagues sitting there. So I'd sit down, have a cup of coffee with them. It was great fun.
But politics, I don't have to tell you, is really it's a team sport. It's the red team, it's the blue team, it's the orange team. And you basically gave up being a member of the team. How did that sit with you?
Well, occasionally you're a little frustrated with it, but most of the time it was fine because the team's carrying on. They don't have to have everybody on the field at the same time, as it were. So it works out that way, I think.
But you got elected in '88. So from '88 to 2001, you're a member of the team, you're on the field, you're playing, you're wearing your colors proudly, and then you just give it all up. Did it feel odd?
No, because I guess I knew what would happen when I got elected to the job. And I'd watched other speakers doing it, John Fraser and Gibby Parent, while I was in the House, and how they'd given up theirs and were doing their job. So it wasn't a complete shock, no.
Okay, but then 3 times during your speakership, you did have to go out and have that grand consultation with the people.
Right.
And you did have to say, vote for me and you'll get the green shift, or vote for me and you'll get, this, that, and the other thing. You'll get Paul Martin's whatever. Did you find that to be difficult?
No, because you just said, if I'm not elected Speaker, I'll be voting for all the things in the Liberal platform in the House. And that was that. So it was fairly straightforward, I think, for the electorate, and certainly for me, because you didn't have views on policies particularly, but you'd say these are the policies I'll be voting for if and when I'm not elected as Speaker.
Gotcha. Only 11 times in Canadian history has the Speaker of the House had to cast a vote in the event of the tie. You know how many of those you're responsible for?
5.
I got 6 down here.
Well, I think I'd love to have a recount on this. I've asked them to check, because there was one where I voted, and then 2 days later, the clerks admitted there'd been a mistake in the count, and my vote was not necessary, and I stood up and said the vote should have been this,
Gotcha.
Therefore the result is that. I think it's 10 because of this, but I've asked them to check that figure. I haven't heard back. But
Okay. Having said that, you have voted, your vote kept a government alive.
One of them, yes.
What's that like?
It's fine. I don't like breaking tie votes. I've had more than my fair share, is my view. But, it's sort of fun. And the interesting thing that happened on that occasion, that I frequently tell this story, 2 weeks before the vote that saved the government, it was a second reading of their budget bill.
Paul Martin's government.
Correct. 2 weeks before, there was a tie vote on a private member's bill brought in by some Conservative members that lengthened prison sentences for various offenses. And there was a tie vote at second reading on this bill. And I voted in favor of second reading, and I stated my reason was to allow for further debate on the bill. And I got a standing ovation from the Conservative opposition, And the Liberals were shocked that I'd voted for this, knowing my views on these subjects. So the hubbub died down in the House after, and I turned to a couple of the Conservatives who were sitting near me and said, you know, this is a great precedent. And they said, oh, yes? I said, oh, yes, you know, if there's a tie vote in 2 weeks at second reading on the government's budget bill, you know which way I'm going to vote. And they looked shocked and went running out of the House to tell their whip that this might happen. And that's exactly what did happen. So no one was surprised when the vote took place.
Short-lived victory for the opposition in that case.
Well, I mean, it was a consistency. I think 3 of the 5 have been second reading tie votes. So
now again, I know you well enough. You're going to play this down, but the reality is, you're the one guy in the history of the Commonwealth who's found a government in contempt. You were the guy.
Is that true? Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
You were the guy. I mean, how does that, knowing how important, you know, and what a student of history you are, surely that means something to you.
Well, I have found that the government was in contempt, a prima facie breach of privileges of the House is what I said it was. It wasn't me that found them in contempt. The committee has to make that finding, and then the committee report needs to be adopted by the House, or some other motion adopted by the House. But I had done it before with a minister, which a precedent I cited in my ruling, when the Liberals had a majority. One of their ministers made one statement one day with a not in it, and the other without a not in it, and the two were totally at variance.
This
totally
was Bevoda.
No.
No, not Bevoda?
No, this was the Liberals. It was Art Eggleton.
Oh, this is going even further
years back.
Okay.
And he made this statement. There was a question of privilege raised by the opposition. I found there was a prima facie breach of privilege, and the matter should be referred to the committee. It was.
Got it.
But I still found the government, you can say I found the government in contempt. I found that the minister had breached the privileges of Parliament by misleading the House, because he said yes and no, really, in 2 different answers to the same question.
Now here's the follow-up question. Knowing how much you care about our parliamentary institutions, our democratic institutions, and knowing how this last election turned out, where your party beat the drum very hard on contempt, and the Conservatives basically said the public doesn't care about it, they swept it under the rug, end of story, and they got the majority, and the Liberals had their worst showing ever. What do you infer from all that?
Hard to say. I don't know whether the issue was one that concerned people a whole lot.
Well,
and don't forget, the contempt was not a finding by the Speaker. Yes, I allowed the matter to be referred to committee, but there was the report from the committee, but then there was a motion finding the government in contempt proposed by the opposition and carried in the House. So it had something to do with, I'm sure, with what the committee had studied, but had there been a majority on the committee of a government majority, I'm sure that the committee finding would not have
passed. Sure.
Would not have passed.
But does it?
As was the case in the one I cited earlier, the committee reported back to the House that there was no breach of the privileges, that the minister had made a mistake.
Well, I'm reading between the lines here. That suggests to you that the finding of contempt was more partisan than than academic, and therefore you're not as upset about it as perhaps the rest of the Liberal Party was.
Well, it may have been partisan. I don't know, because I didn't hear the evidence in the committee, so I didn't form a judgment on the matter. But I think the thing to remember is that with a majority, it's unlikely that the committee would find that one of the government members was in contempt of Parliament. They would likely be satisfied that the explanation offered was more than enough to overcome this, and that was that.
But are you concerned that the Canadian public generally doesn't care as much about our political institutions as you think they should?
Certainly that argument could be made, and I'm surprised that the issue didn't generate more interest in the election in one sense, yeah. But it wasn't so much Bevoda's statements as the production of documents that I think was the issue.
You want to give any advice to your successor?
I'm sure I'll have a good chat with whoever gets elected at some point. Whether it'll be advice on procedural matters, it's going to be more to do, I think, with administration, diplomatic work that is entailed in this job, and relations with other speakers in other countries. I think it'll be more of that than the stuff in the House, because the clerks can give the new speaker all the advice he or she needs after being chosen, and we'll likely do that.
Despite the best efforts of every speaker I've ever met, provincially or federally, it's still a nasty, noisy place in which to do business. Can a speaker really clean that place up?
It'll be a challenge. Members like to have vigorous debates. It may quiet down a bit with a majority. I suspect it will. In a minority situation, you have every party trying to score points at the expense of the others, and I don't mean just one, in their questions and in the answers that are given to the questions. And so because of that, you have a very partisan, very noisy partisan atmosphere with a lot of shots being taken. And I think in a majority situation that might change a little bit, and at least for the first couple of years of it, and you'll find that the questions are perhaps more demanding in terms of content, and the responses will be similar. That's my guess as to what will happen. I may be wrong, but I hope that's the way it works. I think it would be better for the House, and the country would feel more comfortable seeing it that way.
How long is it going to be before, when you hear the words Mr. Speaker, you don't turn around and look at whether or not they're talking to you?
It depends who says it, I guess. people whose voices I know may say it for a while, I guess, and I'll likely recognize it.
We're glad you could spare some time for us for a look back at a very long and distinguished career in the Speaker's chair. Peter Milliken, thanks so much for joining us here on TVO tonight.
Thanks, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.